Good morning, everyone. As Shirish mentioned, it really feels good to be back at an in-person event after 2 years. And as the first presenter of the day, I hope to set a context for the discussions that will follow. So my topic is around changing regulatory expectations, and I want to speak about some significant global developments that have taken place over the last maybe couple of years. And in the latter part of my presentation, I also want to speak about the dialogue around effectiveness, which is taking place within the Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF. And these developments are changing the expectations of regulators and supervisors around AML-CFT from banks or financial institutions, and indeed from all of you as AML compliance officers. So I will sum up with some pointers on how you can stay prepared for what's coming ahead. So let me jump right into it. The last 2 years we have all seen have been extraordinary in the world's history, and they have been equally extraordinary for financial crime landscape. There has been a massive surge in fraud, cybercrime, organized criminal activity. And here are some reports from various sources that point to the same conclusion. And much of this spurt is because of very specific vulnerabilities that were created during the pandemic. So lockdowns, remote working, there were job losses, economic difficulties that made easier targets out of people who chose to become money mules or engage in criminal activities. So here's one trend analysis which shows the number of customers identified as suspected money mules. This is from a national bank in the UAE, and this is part of a COVID typologies report that was published by the Central Bank of the UAE. And the interesting thing to note here is that these peaks that you see actually correspond with the COVID waves that the country saw, the rising cases in the country. And I'm sure this is the case in other countries as well. The Interpol has been very, very active during the pandemic in creating awareness about money mules. They have intercepted a lot of cases of money laundering and fraud, which involved thousands of money mules and thousands, multiple countries as well. So this is one example, one typology that we saw, but there were a similar surge in other areas, such as counterfeiting or phishing, even romance scams, which were basically exploiting people's vulnerabilities. So initially when the pandemic struck, FIU's supervisors, they made a few concessions, few days worth of concessions. They tweaked a few reporting deadlines for some time. But as these crime typologies started to manifest, they expected banks to react promptly, to put in place preventive measures. There were a lot of regulators that also published typology reports during COVID. They, pushed advisories, guidance documents to help banks monitor and prevent financial crime. But let's say not everything was negative. There were some positive consequences in terms of digital transformation as the whole world moved online. There are a couple of areas to highlight within AML-CFT. eKYC, which is the electronic verification of customer identity. It had already started in a few countries before the pandemic struck. But during the pandemic, during lockdowns, so that banking services could continue as usual, a lot of regulators also allowed it within their countries. And especially where a central national identity database was available and was digital, eKYC became relatively easier to implement and it gained more traction. Some countries also allowed video-based customer identification and verification, which basically substituted completely for physical account opening and also for re-KYC. So in fact, digital onboarding is gaining a lot of traction around Asia. It's picking up. It brings benefits both to banks in terms of cost savings or efficiency gains, in reducing human error. It also brings a lot of benefits to the customer in terms of, a better and more convenient experience of onboarding. Even in Nepal, I believe the regulator does allow digital onboarding, and that, it's picking up in a few banks. Also in low to middle income countries in Asia, digitalization has also brought financial inclusion benefits. especially through growth in mobile wallets and digital payment services. And there was a use case during the pandemic when subsidies and benefits had to be transferred to economically weaker sections during lockdowns. So, for example, Bangladesh has reported a lot of success with financial inclusion accounts during the lockdown. So regulators would be looking to further leverage this trend and bring in more unbanked populations into the folds of the formal financial system. But they're also advising banks and FIs to keep an appropriate focus on risk mitigation, whether it is the customer risk or it is the technology risk from new solutions deployed during the pandemic. On technology, the growth of fintech and regtech, it has continued during the pandemic. It has provided innovative solutions for the financial services industry. And really, given the scale and the complexity and real-time nature of global finance now, leveraging technology and automation for AML CFT will be inevitable even going forward. So the FATF has also acknowledged this in a report in July 2021 on the opportunities and challenges of new technologies for AML CFT. They identified these 5 technology areas that you see here on the screen as the 5 areas that have the potential to make AML CFT faster, cheaper, more effective, not just for the private sector, but for the supervisors as well. So now again, many countries are encouraging the use of technology and innovation in AML CFT to help the private sector to enhance their compliance programs. Of course, they have expectations on how these solutions should be deployed. They should be auditable, explainable, and effective. So last year we ran a survey of banks in Asia. This was about 150 banks participated in this survey. And they responded that, more than 70% responded that they're betting very large on RegTech to help support onboarding and monitoring in the coming years. So that's the outlook really from the industry on the role of technology. Let me move to part 2 on cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is becoming increasingly mainstream now to global finance. And it has in fact left the world divided, heavily divided, on how to address the risk. So there are 3 types of groups now of countries that are there. Some countries have chosen to regulate the space. So we have Singapore, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong in our region that have been leading regulators. Some have banned cryptocurrencies. So China, Nepal, Bangladesh, these are the countries that have banned. And some are yet to make a decision. So India is one of them. It's neither legal nor banned in India. So in most countries around the world where cryptocurrencies are allowed, there is a licensing system now which is in place. So VASPs or virtual asset service providers or cryptocurrency exchanges have to apply for a license and then they are allowed to provide crypto services. And then the whole range of AML KYC regulations also apply to these VASPs, just like in the case of any other financial services sector. And the expectation is that tracing and tracking illicit activity in crypto funds will actually be much easier if that sector is regulated. However, countries that have chosen to regulate are also assessing their position. So China, which used to allow crypto mining, all types of crypto transactions, suddenly reversed their decision in September 2021 and banned cryptocurrencies altogether. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is considered as one of the leading regulators in this space, in Jan 2022, they actually had an advisory which prohibited crypto exchanges from advertising or marketing their services to retail investors. And they cited that these kind of assets are extremely risky and not suitable for the general public. And some saw this development as being slightly contrary to the open position that Singapore had until then. But that's how the nature of this space is. Countries are continuously evaluating their position, they're assessing the risks, and sometimes they have to put very drastic mitigation measures in place. What's the wrong slide? Sorry. Sorry about this. Right. So another point in this is the travel rule, and there's an important FATF recommendation again that the travel rule has to be implemented by countries that regulate. Also, a number of enforcements are taking place in the crypto area. Regulators are very strict with crypto exchanges that are registered with them. There have also been some recent instances of seizures of cryptos and non-fungible tokens, especially in the US and UK. And now they're very sophisticated software that help both the private sector as well as the law enforcement agencies to track and trace crypto transactions and identify suspicious activity. Now, generally, when we talk to compliance officers in countries like Nepal or Bangladesh, where virtual currencies are actually banned, the general response that we get is that, it's banned in my country, so there's really nothing that I can do. Correct? Doesn't affect me. But that's really not the case. I would highlight this guidance, which is published by the FATF on virtual assets and virtual asset service providers in October 2021, where the FATF states that a jurisdiction has the discretion to, prohibit or to regulate cryptocurrencies. However, the guidance mentions very clearly that the country must continue to assess its money laundering and terror financing risks, regardless of the prohibition, and they must put in place mitigation strategies that include, outreach and enforcement. Which means that, your obligation as a AML compliance officer does not end because your country has banned virtual assets. You still need to monitor your transactions very closely. You need to assess whether your institution is being exploited and whether any illegal crypto trading is taking place either from fiat to crypto and vice versa in your jurisdiction. And also this is a very upcoming space, and whether or not your country is allowing it, you still need to keep track, you still need to understand what's happening in the global market. And this is corroborated by this findings from this survey that we had again from 170 banks and financial institutions. And we asked them, what do you feel is going to be the impact of cryptocurrency on your role as in the AML compliance function in the next 2 to 3 years? And we saw that 63% felt that this impact will be very high. Another 31% felt that it will be moderate. So as AML compliance officers, if you haven't already started, it would be good to be aware of crypto developments so that any risk that your organization faces, you can identify it, you can mitigate it, and you can ensure that your organization is not caught up in the regulatory arbitrage. So in the last couple of years, we all know there have been very large, changes in the whole sanctions landscape due to a whole host of issues like the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, the US-China diplomatic relationship over Hong Kong, and of course, more recently, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I don't want to go into detail on this because then we have a couple of other presentations on this topic later in the day. But I just wanted to present. Is it moving on its own? Yeah, okay, it's okay. It's not moving actually. Okay, I'm really lost now. Can you go backwards? Yeah, okay. Back. Okay, my apologies for this. I wanted to present a quick overview of Russian sanctions on this slide, and it's a very crowded slide, again, my apologies. Many countries on this map have imposed sanctions, and the ones that you see in the red box are actually imposed by most countries. Notably, 7 Russian banks were struck off the SWIFT system. Oil and energy imports from Russia have been impacted. Russian ships and aircraft have been banned in some of these countries. And the US, UK, EU have been more aggressive. They have imposed far more sanctions than some of the other countries. And it's a very complex situation, really. Okay. It's a very complex situation, and one that is changing on a daily basis. But if you have business with any of these countries, or your customers are transacting with these geographies, there is no choice for you but to keep on top of these developments on a daily basis. And if you don't comply, there can be extremely severe consequences in terms of your correspondent banking relationships. So for your bank or financial institution and for your AML compliance, so for your AML compliance team, the expectation will be that you prioritize your sanction screening, ensure that alerts are closely monitored, they're disposed of urgently. So if that means putting in place more resources, that's what you'll have to do. You'll have to provide more continuous training to your staff. You may have to have an expert on hand to clarify some of the issues that come up. And if you don't have an automated tool that tracks this for you, there's probably never been a better time to invest into it. So again, we have seen over the last few years a lot of conversation and questions around, all of these AML controls are in place, but are they really effective? Are they really making the global AML system more effective? And this dialogue is driven not just by the FATF, but by a whole host of different stakeholders within this industry, such as the United Nations, European Union, a lot of NGOs like the ICIJ, RUSI. In fact, every time there is a scandal, like the Panama Papers, or the recent Credit Suisse data leaks, this criticism of the current system picks up again, especially on curtailing corruption, kleptocracy, stopping the misuse of shell companies, making beneficial ownership information more accessible. So last week there was a very interesting report which was released by the FATF on the state of effectiveness and compliance within the FATF standards. And it essentially compares results across 120 countries which were evaluated on the mutual evaluation since 2013. And the underlying conclusion of this report is that while most countries have put in place all the 40 recommendations and all the FATF standards, there is a very big gap in terms of effective implementation of these frameworks. So 76% countries were found compliant or largely compliant on those technical recommendations, 40 recommendations, but actually only 21% had high or substantial effectiveness measured across the 11 outcome areas. In terms of the private sector's involvement, this report finds that about 120 countries were assessed, and only 97, or rather all 97%, have low to moderate effectiveness ratings for preventing MLTF in the private sector. And there's an interesting comment there which says that private sector entities need a change of culture in applying a true risk-based approach to conduct customer due diligence, keep records, and file suspicious transactions. So over the years, the expectation from the reporting entity is that they take a risk-based approach to prevention of money laundering and the application of control measures, which necessitates a very accurate understanding of risks in the first place. So again, the analysis in this report shows that among private sector entities, by and large, banks are doing much better. So in 64% of the banks, the FATF assessors that were doing these mutual evaluations, they felt that the understanding of risks was good or very good. Another 20% banks, it was average. So that's the good news. However, when it came to risk mitigation, this report found even within banks that only 40% of the banks were actually fared well. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. Extremely sorry. So this conclusion was that 40% banks fared well on the necessary measures to be taken, with 51% in the average bracket. So based on the learnings from these, this report and from all the dialogue that's going on, the FATF has now tweaked the methodology for the 5th round of mutual evaluations, which is coming up in the next couple of years. And now there will be a major focus on measuring the effectiveness of controls. So there are 3 areas that have been highlighted. One is that there's significantly shorter mutual evaluation cycles so that countries get assessed more frequently. So it's very common. There's a tendency for countries to start picking up on closing the gaps when their own mutual evaluations are closer. But with shorter cycles, it's expected that the pressure will be on and there'll be some continuous action. There's also expected to be greater emphasis on the major risks and the context to ensure that countries focus on the areas where the risks are highest. So this should force not just the private sector but also the supervisors to continuously update their risk assessments and prioritize the risks. Already a lot of countries are publishing extremely granular sectoral risk assessments and typologies reports in addition to their national risk assessment. Which will help the private sector assess their own risks in the overall national context. And the third part is a results-oriented follow-up process that is expected to focus on very specific actions to tackle the identified risks. So that's pretty much the broader direction and context within which the FATF is revising its upcoming recommendations. And it's also encouraging country-level supervisors and regulators to drive the AML CFT compliance agenda in the next few years. And the focus is going to be on that one word, effectiveness. Obviously, this will percolate down to you in the private sector in the coming months and years. So there are a few things that you can start thinking about right away. You need to ensure that you're on top of all the regulatory changes that are taking place, and I would add including cryptocurrencies. Because if you're prepared for what's coming, you can plan ahead, you can plan in advance on how to go about implementing it. You need to focus on accurate, ongoing and detailed risk assessments, and these will play a very, very important role going forward. So you need to put in place tools or build the capabilities, skilled resources to do this in future. You'll also have to follow up that assessment with the right risk mitigation measures, because that's exactly what's going to make your AML compliance program more effective. It would also be good to take a futuristic view on data and technology. So you can bring in more automation, you can reduce your false positives, you can reduce the margin on human error, you can make your processes more efficient. And of course it will mean budgets and investments and resources. But I think in the longer run, more and more there has to be a realization that compliance is not a cost, that it can be an extremely important risk management tool for your organization. It can give you a competitive edge. It can keep you out of any reputational damage due to penalties. And it can improve the reputation of your country and make it more attractive to foreign investment. So that's it from me. Again, I apologize for the number of technical glitches. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them at this point.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. So I just want to know regarding digital transformation you spoke. Video-based customer identification, because it's a bit new for us for here in Nepal. And please give insight on how effective in perspective of AML CFT mitigation risks on this. And another question from my side is, I just want to know how many countries have complied all 40 FATF recommendations. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So your first question was around video-based KYC, right? So I will speak from the Indian experience, right? So e-KYC, which is the electronic verification, that part was allowed by our central bank way back, I think, in 2018. Am I right, Amita ma'am? Right? And just before the pandemic struck in Jan 2020, the RBI allowed video-based customer identification. So basically the physical part of the customer's verification is conducted online. So there is a very elaborate process for that which is followed by banks. The customer has to be taken on a video call from a domain that originates within that particular bank's URL. They ask certain questions to the customer to authenticate, to verify. They ask some questions which I believe are called liveliness questions. So they may ask you to wave your hand just to ensure that it's not a fraud or it's a recorded video. And then basically the customer's documents are additionally verified using eKYC method. And this completely substitutes for the physical account opening process. So there is no further onus on the customer, and that customer can start operating their account immediately. So from the AML KYC point of view, the data that can be collected from the customer, their location, their place where they are located, all of this adds a lot of value to the data that they already have, banks already have. And it has been extremely successfully implemented in a few countries. So I know of India, I also know that it has started in Indonesia and some other countries. Sure, sure.
Yeah, 2 points I will just add on it. One is, every such case there has to be a... First of all, it is allowed only within the country, geographically. And secondly, there is a concurrent auditor supposed to be auditing each of such account, because there are no transaction limit or anything on accounts opened in such manner. So there will be a concurrent audit on this. These are the 2 points.
Right, thank you. And your second question again, can you repeat that?
I just want to know how many countries have.
Yes, yes. Right, so this report has more information, but in terms of implementing the standards, all 206 countries that are part of the FATF, either directly as FATF members or as members of FATF-style regional bodies, so like APG, they would have implemented, maybe not all the 40 recommendations, but they would have implemented most of the recommendations. But there would be some more data on in the report.
So you are saying that those countries has complied all 40 recommendations, all compliant.
So the regulation around the 40 recommendation will be there. Whether they are implemented, whether they are implemented effectively is another thing too, right? If not, they would already be on the grey list.
I also have a question.
Yes.
It is around cryptos.
Yeah.
So we have been hearing of, like Nepal and India, central government are coming out with CBDC, that is central bank digital currency. So what do you think, will that curve the vast usage of cryptocurrency?
So actually there's a big difference between the cryptocurrency and the central bank digital currency, and there's I think a lot of countries are in the process of putting in place CBDC, so it's anybody's guess. We'll have to wait to see how they're being used. But yeah, there is some benefit for central governments in introducing those CBDCs, and there can be full monitoring and understanding of how money is flowing through those CBDCs.
Still, I think the use of cryptos.
I think the use of cryptos is going to go up. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you.
But there's a lot of research now coming out that not all of the cryptocurrency transactions are used for illicit activities. Right? There's a lot of legitimate use also that's going up.
Right.
So it needn't be equated with illicit activity.
Thank you.
Right. It's okay.
So in response to that, for your question, I think between CBDC and virtual currencies, so virtual currencies are going to be volatile. The price is going to be more of investment speculation, all that in that. That may not happen in CBDCs. And I think India also, when they actually come out with the digital rupee, the plan is that most of the transactions that it's going to be used for is really going to be for things like payment of stamp duty or real estate contracts and things like that, to reduce the currency circulation, the paper currency circulation in the country.